Do we start? Okay. Already there are people in the office. It's okay. It's okay. We'll start.
Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to the webinar series organized by Ramaiah Institute of Management. I, Professor Megha Balasubramaniam, along with my colleague,
Professor Yashaswini,
will be presenting to you on a topic on migrant worker legislations, a reality check in the COVID scenario. Before we start off, quick few pointers. I request all of you to make sure you have muted your mics. Second, if you have any questions to ask us, you can post that in the chat box. We will dedicate the last 15 minutes of the session for a discussion on this. And post this session, there would be a form that would be shared with you. We request you to take a minute's time in giving your feedback on it as well. So I guess we are good to go. So we'll start off this session with a video by the actress Taapsee Pannu. She has voiced for this video, and this video probably tells the trauma that our migrant workers have actually gone through. Yeah, so we'll have the video first.
हम तो बस प्रवासी हैं, क्या इस देश के वासी हैं? अगर हम नहीं हैं इंसान तो मार दो हमें, दे दो फरमान। खाने को तो कुछ ना मिल पाया, भूख लगी तो डंडा खाया। फासले तय किए हजारों मील के, कुछ साइकिल पर कुछ पैर नंगे। मरे कई भूख से और कई धूप से, पर हिम्मत ना टूटी बड़ों के झूठ से। बस से भेजकर, रेल से भेजकर, जान खो बैठे रास्ते भूलकर। यहाँ प्रतिमाओं की बड़ी है हस्ती, पर इंसानों की जान है सस्ती। बड़े सपने, अच्छे दिन बतलाए, पर भूख किसी की मिटा ना पाए। चाहिए ना भीख ना दान, बस ना छीनो आत्मसम्मान। हम तो बस प्रवासी हैं, क्या इस देश के वासी हैं?
This one video talks a lot about what our migrant workers have actually gone through. So let's look into who these migrant workers are, what really went, what they have really gone through, and what are the legislations that are in to support them or to make sure their rights are a part of it. We have divided this session into two parts. The initial part would be dealt by me, and my colleague would deal with the intricate details of labor legislations. So for the past few days, we all have been seeing a lot of these disheartening and disturbing videos and pictures that are being posted on social networking sites or on the news channels about how these migrant workers have been, how these people are on the streets walking hundreds of kilometers to reach their village, to reach their hometown. Who are these people? These are our Indians' invisible workforce. They are the deprived community of our country. Who are these migrant workers then? Migrant workers are those who are enumerated in census at a different place than that of a place from where they actually are. So these people can either be semi-permanent, they can be circular, or they can be permanent migrants. Now, we have millions of these migrants in India who are working in either construction sites, or you can find them as a domestic helper, or you will find them as street vendors, or you will find them probably around us doing some odd jobs. Probably the parcel that you received from Amazon was probably delivered by one of these people. Or these people are those who deliver the food that you order from your favorite restaurants. Or probably these are people who have come to your homes to fix your plumbing or electric work. So these are people who are the integral part of our lives. Yeah, they make our lives much easier. Yeah. So these migrant workers mostly are semi-skilled or unskilled, and mostly are engaged in the unorganized or the informal sector. And most of these migrant workers receive a very low salary, or sorry, I should be mentioning it as wages, very low wages. So these are people who probably were knocked out during this lockdown. Yeah? They were desperate to get back to their homes. They were really they were in the streets without food, without job. So basically, they were locked out of their work. They were locked out of their houses. They were locked out of the construction sites, probably where they were working and they were living. They were knocked out by the resident associations of the posh neighborhoods who were feared that these people can be carriers or can spread the virus. So these are people who have faced the heat of the lockdown. They are the people who have actually gone through a lot during this pandemic. So in India, we have close to 100 million people as migrants, and this is according to the 2011 census. Now, there are certain reports which also claim that the migrants have increased to close to 140, but so we'll keep it around 100 to 140 million migrants in India. Now, why do these people actually migrate? So let's look at why do they migrate, where do they migrate from? Like any human being, these are people who want to have a safe and a life which probably is helps them to have a proper meal for a day, make sure they have access to medical facilities. Yeah, so these are people who are in poverty, who are unemployed. So that pushes them to move from their parent state or from their parent city to a host city which has more opportunities, which is more safer, where they have more stability and they have more freedom. So basically, these people move to make an economic living. Don't you think all of us actually do this? Now, if we look at it in that way, most of us are migrants, aren't we? It's just that we all are privileged to have education and to have access to all the necessities and luxuries of life. But these are people who probably do not have access to that. Yeah, so they move to cities to make sure they can give a better living, a better life to their children or to their family. Reports, again, the 2011 census reports state that the percentage of migration has increased. In fact, I should say it is accelerated over the past decade. From 2.4% between 1991 to 2001 to a percentage of 4.5% between 2001 to 2011. That's quite an increase. Yeah. So where do these migrants actually come from? So these migrants, so this map clearly tells us where these migrants come from. The blue, the icon in blue, which is marked over here in locations, more are the source. That is, these are places from where migrants come from. And the ones which are marked in brown are the places where these migrants go to. So if we look at this, it very clearly states that Uttar Pradesh tops the list. So basically, we have a lot of migrants from Uttar Pradesh. So we can probably say Uttar Pradesh is one of the states with majority of the supply who supply laborers to the whole of the country, followed by Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. And these migrants or these people move generally to the first location is Delhi, which is again followed by Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, Punjab, and Karnataka. So when these people move, now when we look at, when these people move, if you look at the rural and the urban percentage over here, so when it comes to rural, it is almost 2/3, that is 67.2% of them are from the rural, and urban is around 32.8% of them. And when these people actually move, that is when these migrants, move from their parent city or their parent village to a host city, where are they generally employed? They are employed in various sectors, but the list tops. The list has construction as the first one. So there are around 36.2% of people or migrants who are employed in the construction sites or as construction workers. 20.4% of them are employed in the agricultural sector, and 15.9% of them are employed in the manufacturing. So the others include certain other services which they are generally involved into. Now, looking at, I'm sure we have really understood why these people actually move, where do they come from, but what role are they playing in our Indian economy? These migrants, I should say, are the seed of our economy. They are the backbone of our economy, contributing almost 10% of GDP to the Indian economy. These are people who make our lives easier. These are people who probably have made these infrastructure for us. The buildings that we are sitting in, the roads that we are using, all these are built by these migrants. Yeah? So not only do they work over here in the cities, but a portion of what they earn is they also send it to their villages as well. So which means they are trying to make sure their family, which is back in their village, is also out of poverty. At least they're able to make sure that they can have one-time food, a proper meal in a day. So these migrants are those people who actually are vital to our economy. Now we all know they are vital, but yet they are vulnerable. Why are they vulnerable? These are people who lack education. They are underpaid for the amount of work that they do. And these are people who do not have direct access to health facilities. And considering the fact that they come under malnutrition, I mean, thanks to malnutrition, most of these people are vulnerable to communicable diseases or occupational health hazards. The government of India has enacted a lot of legislations, there are a lot of labor laws which actually support these laborers. A number of the details of which will be shared by my colleague later in the discussion. But if we look at why they are vulnerable, these laws which provide the rights to these migrant workers is something that they are not aware of. They don't even know that they have a right that they can ask for when they are being exploited by either the contractors or by the employers. So looking at the scenario of, looking at the background of these migrant workers, during such a pandemic, a COVID-19 pandemic, what made them to remigrate? When I say remigrate, these are migrants who now want to get back to their villages. What literally forced them to do that? Yeah? These are people who were locked out of their work, which means they did not have food. They did not have sufficient money to make sure they can get back to their villages. Yeah, so this obviously forced them to move to their or relocate or demigrate to their villages. There are three main reasons why this really happened, or why this migrant crisis really came into picture. First one, if you look at, again, let's look at a little bit of facts over here. 52% of these migrants are self-employed. Now, when I say self-employed, they can be in street vendors, people who are selling vegetables, fruits, or probably have these chat centers, or these are people whom have made sure they are self-employed. Now, when I say self-employed, let us understand, during a lockdown, for the 1.5 months, during close to 60 days of lockdown that was there, these were people who were not making or who were not earning any money unless they were providing certain essentials like fruits, vegetables, or medicines. If they were not providing these essentials, which means clearly these are people, these 52% who are self-employed, did not earn anything during this lockdown period. And the remaining 48%, out of the remaining 48%, 25% of them are non-regular work. When I say non-regular workers, which means they end up doing some odd jobs, and the moment they finish their job, they are paid for it. Yeah. So during the lockdown, when all the economic activities were suspended or was asked not to have any of these economic activities, how do you think these workers can do even some odd jobs and make a earning, which clearly means, again, this is another percentage of people who were not earning anything during the lockdown. Next balance, 23% who fall into the regular work category, which means they do have a job, wherein on regularly, so it's either weekly or monthly, these are people who receive wages. Now, with this 23%, when there was during the lockdown, when they were told to close all the economic activities, obviously all the factories or services, all the organizational setups closed down, which means the employers, that is the organizations, did not pay these workers. So these workers were not paid even for the March month, where for the first 20 days they had worked. They were not paid for that as well, which clearly means that majority of the migrant workers did not earn anything during the lockdown. Now, obviously, when they don't earn anything during the lockdown, how are they going to feed themselves? How are they going to make sure they have a living? You might ask a question. They have been working for so long, and 52% of them, in fact, are self-employed. So we can, term them as entrepreneurs for that matter. So I'm sure they will have some savings, right? So they can probably make a living with those savings for a few days until, few days for the lockdown. Again, let's get into some facts to get that cleared. 80% of that self-employed, 52% of the self-employed people earn less than 15,000 per month. Come on. I'm sure all of us know 15,000 per month is nowhere sufficient for making a decent living in the urban setup. So savings for these people is something probably they don't even think of. Yeah. So self-employed people did not have sufficient money to make a living, and obviously people who were doing odd jobs, they did not have jobs, they did not have work, nobody paid them. So obviously, no money to have food, no money to go back home, yeah, and they did not even have money to, in fact, even give a call to their villages and say, we are safe, yeah. So that was the plight of these people, and that's the reason these people took to the roads, walked hundreds of kilometers with their children and luggage around, in the scorching sun. These people wanted to get back to their villages. This is one of the reasons. Let's come to the second reason. Now, these people who wanted to go back to villages, now in villages, let's understand there is generally a community. All the people who are in the village, they all belong to a community, or they have that understanding among themselves. So they feel during such crisis or during such, say hard time, if you are along with your people, if you are along with your community, there are chances that they will help you out, which is unlikely to happen in the urban areas. That's the second reason that they wanted to move. Third reason, majority of these workers who have, or these people who have migrated for work will have a small piece of land back in their villages. So they were of the opinion that instead of starving, dying over here, starving and dying over here, it's always better we get back to our villages, probably cultivate that small piece of land, take the help of the incentives or the schemes that the government is providing, and make sure we make a living over there. Yeah. So these were the three main reasons why all these people wanted to literally rush and go and reach their villages. Yeah. But this is one side of the story. Yeah, one side of the story. They already had that scar. They were traumatized already by having to walk so many kilometers without food. Yeah. Other side of the story is when these people reached their villages or reached the borders of their state, the villagers or their state were very reluctant to take them in or allow them in or welcome them for the very fact that they also feared, what if these people are carriers of the virus? So obviously authorities sprayed disinfectant on them, but the fact that they were not welcomed was another way of another round of traumatizing for them. So these migrant workers went through a trauma almost twice. Yeah? According to Dr. Abhay, who is a Padma Shri awardee and a social activist who is actively working in the rural areas of Maharashtra along with his wife, he says these migrants probably these migrants will need a lot of time to come out of this trauma because they have been ill-treated. They had no access to basic necessities. So the trauma that they have gone through, the mental scar that has happened, keeping aside the physical strain that they've walked through the hundreds of kilometers, they might take some time to revive themselves. To add on to it, Professor Chinmay Tambe from IMA, who is also author of a book called as India Moving, A History of Migration, who has done a lot of research on migration and migrant workers. He says these people who have the scar or the fear of getting back to work might not return to work. As in, if they don't return to work, there is one point of a major concern for all of us. And what is that? The employers who did not support them, are going to be in deep trouble. Because if they don't return, there's going to be a labor shortage, which automatically means the cost of labor is going to increase and cost of production is going to increase, which in turn will lead to rise in prices of commodities. Now, when I say commodities, if these commodities are essentials, people will still go ahead and buy, which means there will be a demand. But if these commodities are non-essential commodities, which means the demand is going to reduce. So our employers who were supposed to support these people during a crisis like this, who did not support them, are going to be in deep trouble if these workers don't get back to work. So Professor Chinmay Tambe, according to his research, also mentions that there are chances that these workers will get back. Reason being, these workers who are now moved to their village or to their hometown, which was a supplier of, which used to supply labor, which had surplus of labor, who used to send labor out to work, now have laborers in their own state. If those states do not create a livelihood for these people, do not help them in upskilling or reskilling and create a livelihood for them, just not providing some mere amount or providing them groceries at free of cost. Yeah, just not that. If they can create a livelihood for them, help them in making a livelihood in their own state, I'm sure none of these migrant workers are going to return. None of them are going to return. But if those states fail to do that, which means to make a living, to make sure their family has access to all the necessities, these people will again migrate, which means they will return to work, but at least not till the end of the year. That is what researchers say. So which means if we look at both the sides, not only the employers are going to be in trouble if the states do not provide a good livelihood for their own workers, for their own people, they might migrate again. Yeah. This probably was the scenario which none of us had expected. Yeah, where the whole world is dealing with a pandemic. Yeah, we in India are not only dealing with a pandemic crisis or a health crisis, we are dealing with a migration crisis. We are dealing with a migrant crisis. When the rest of the nation stayed home, we all stayed safe. All these workers were staying on streets and on their own. Why were they not helped out? Why were they not helped out? Government, associations, their own employees, their contractors, none of them probably, I will not say none of them helped out, but the help that they provided probably was not sufficient. The details of this and details related to the labor legislations and the rights of these laborers is what would be covered by my colleague. It's over to Professor Yashaswini.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying with us, and thank you, Professor Megha, for introducing this topic so explicitly to the gathering present here. And it's that time of this webinar when we move on to explore the various legislations that are present in the country for the topic of this webinar, migrant workers. Before we move on to migrant workers per se, let us understand what are labor laws. Labor laws are legislations enacted for the labor class workforce that works as the basic entry-level workforce in any organization. These laws have been enacted in the country from a long time. It dates back to as long as the colonial rules during the British. Over a period of time, there have been various revisions, various amendments, enactment of new laws to suit new industrial dynamics. And presently, we are looking at having over 200 state laws and 50 central laws. The state laws focus explicitly on those industries which exist only in that particular state. For example, your Plantation Act. The Plantation Act focuses exclusively on all those industries or companies which have or work on a plantation. Might be applicable in states like Karnataka, Kerala, Northeast, where you have a lot of plantations. On the other hand, the central laws, they are around close to 50 central laws, which are a standard set of guidelines which have to be adopted by every organization across the country. Central laws such as PF laws, ESI, Factories Act, Minimum Wages Act are some of the examples of central laws. Effectively, all these laws, the labor legislations per se, are based on 4 basic principles of labor legislations. They are social justice, social equity, international uniformity, and national economy. What is social justice? Social justice is when we are trying to bring in equal treatment of employees across economic strata or social strata. We are bringing in equality in payment of wages. They are bringing in equality in the amount of work they do. Working conditions are going to be the same for all the employees. Ensuring there is welfare and benefit of ensuring there is welfare, there is growth, there is safety of all the employees are the crux, are the important aspects of social equity. International uniformity is the aspect where we are trying to bring in a global standard and ensuring while we do all this, we are also focusing on the economy aspect of the state. Moving on to the focus of our webinar, the interstate migrants or the migrant legislations per se. Now, the migrant legislations are the legislations that are focused on migrant workers can be any one of these or all of these together as a combination. Now, let us begin from the first law, which is the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, which was enacted in the year 1979. Now, this act is an act which was enacted soon after the emergency ended in the year 1970, during the 1970s, and that was the time when the practice of migration has just begun. That's when people moved from their parent state to other states where there was more of industrialization and better opportunities in terms of jobs and employment and standard of living. This act is applicable to any industry which employs 5 or more migrant workers in their organizational premises or their organizational activities. It is a law which focuses extensively on identifying the contractors who are going to bring these migrant workers from their parent country to the host country. It is also the law which is going to identify what is the role of the principal employer, the owner of that factory or the company where these migrant workers are going to be working. Moving on, there are other laws such as the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act of 1970. This act, also enacted during the same period, focuses more on the contract labor. In fact, the interstate migrant workman was an offshoot of law, or can be considered as an offshoot of contract labor, and wherein they try to focus exclusively on the migrant worker issues which were prevalent in those days. The Factories Act and Minimum Wages Act have been in existence for a long period of time, still hold relevant for the fact that they look at the basic elements required for an employee even to this day. They're looking at safety, welfare, health, and payment of minimum wages for the amount of work that they do. Some other acts like Contract of Agency focuses on the relationship the contractor is going to have with the migrant workers and the principal employers. So if there are some discrepancies or some issues related to the contractual agreements or contractual statements that are going to be occurring between the transactions in between the contract workers, migrant workers, or the principal employees, Contract of Agency is often considered as a body of law which gives us a guidelines as to how this can be taken forward. Building and Other Construction Workers Act, enacted in the year 1996, focuses exclusively on all those workers who are employed in the construction areas. Now, we have seen in the recent past, there is a surge in the infrastructural development that is happening across the country, both government-owned infrastructural development as well as private entities who run construction enterprises or construction businesses. We have seen the presence of workers here are, in most cases, they are migrant laborers who have moved in from states like UP, Bihar, Orissa, West Bengal. For all you know, they are the ones who are building your houses if you are staying in Mumbai, Bangalore, or anywhere else in the country, in most cases. Right? So this particular act focuses on that particular segment of migrant workers who are associated with a construction company. Now, we do have all these legislations. We do have a detailed set of procedures and provisions presented in each of these laws. They do cover all the facets of the employees. But how do they do so? What is the mechanism? There is a certain purpose they all carry. The objectives of all these acts have been highlighted here. These are the highlights of the objectives that we are going to have, we do see in these acts. Prevention of exploitation, creation of a database, ensuring there is proper working conditions, ensuring health, safety, and welfare, ensuring there is a secure and adequate living wage, also focuses on the basic needs of the employee, and who he could be a contract employee or a migrant employee. This aspect of the law can become a success. Now, successful laws have become successful for the fact that they are having appropriate implementation. Now, implementation happens at 3 levels. The first level is where the appropriate government pitches in and appoints inspectors or enforcement officers. Now, what is the appropriate government? In legal parlance, the legal language, we often identify the state or the central government which is going to adopt any labor legislation within their organization, within the organization that belongs to that particular body, will become the appropriate government. For a state law, the state government can become the appropriate government. For a central law like Interstate Migrant Workmen or Factories Act, the central government becomes the appropriate government. Inspectors and enforcement officers are appointed as per the rules stated in these laws. Each of these laws contain detailed specifications on how and who can be appointed as the inspector or enforcement officer. The sole purpose of these inspectors or enforcement officers is going to be ensuring there is compliance to all the provisions of the particular act that they are associated with. Second level of implementation happens at the industry level, where there are industry specific laws. They come up with policies, they come up with the practices which are going to be adopted as a norm across all the organizations within that particular industry. In a more granular level, we see the organizations playing a vital role in implementation of these laws. In the organization, we can see the employer. The employer can be your owner, the manager, the reporting authority, any person to whom the migrant worker reports. He can become the employer. The employer role is very, very crucial in implementation. They are the ones who are going to follow the nuances of the law and ensure they are put in practice. Followed by contractors. Many a times their importance is as good as the employers themselves. In case of the migrant workers, the contractors become a very, very important entity because they are the ones who are bringing in the migrant workers from various parts of the country to the organization they are made to work in. Now, the contractors are the ones who are going to also pay the migrant workers. Now, the payment of wages is one of the responsibility of the contractors, in addition to the others wherein they're looking at the implementation of provisions stated in the law, which can be towards the welfare, the health, and benefits of the laborers who are working in an organization. Followed by the other authorities who are having some kind of authority vested in them in ensuring there is implementation. While we have these laws, we have implementation, we have detailed analysis being made and detailed provisions being written down, we still came across this migrant worker crisis, which was very explicitly described by my colleague, Professor Megha. Now, this migrant worker crisis has a series of events which led to the crisis in reality. The first event was the occurrence of the coronavirus, and to fight the measures taken to fight against the coronavirus was one of the measures that was taken was to announce a lockdown. Announcement of lockdown meant you are going to shut down every institution, every organization, and stop all economic activity so that you are not having contact with each other, which was the means through which the virus could spread. Now, with the announcement of lockdown, that meant you are going to stop everything. So are you just going to stop everything abruptly? There should be some guidelines, right? So the guidelines given by the government were, first thing, to stay indoors. For any organization, any employee, any sector, any industry. Suppose you are paying, your employees are staying indoors and they are not coming down to work, and they are not able to contribute to the organization's development. They are still going to be considered as to be deemed to be on duty. That means the guidelines suggested that despite not working or not contributing productively to the organizational goals, their employees were still to be considered as on duty. They were still supposed to be given wages. For those employees who could work from home, like in the IT or the software or the insurance or any other sector for that matter, they continue to work from home and they will be paid salaries. For those who do not have the opportunity to work from home, and they cannot really work from home because they belong to the manufacturing sector or the production sector, they can still be they can still stay at home, but their wages would be paid in full as per the guidelines given by the government on guidelines dated March 29, which was given by the government related to the announcement of lockdown. It was also announced that the guidelines also included that leave will not be adjusted for the absence. You would have accrued leave, which you would have had a good number of leaves accrued for over a period of year. That leave will not be adjusted for this particular absence during the lockdown. It is still going to be considered as a paid leave. So what happens? Everybody stays indoors. The employees are enjoying their time with family. The mid-level employees rather are enjoying their time with family. We suddenly see pollution has come down. But during the second lockdown is where the crisis started creeping up. You started observing migrant workers calling out to the government and the authorities, their organizations, their contractors, asking for some respite in terms of providing wages, providing facilities, healthcare, and the like. During the second lockdown is when we saw the migrants felt there is no opportunity in the host state. They did not receive payment, they did not receive wages, and they also felt the crisis, the real crisis came in when there was absence of facility to take them back home. The crisis arose because of this lack of infrastructural facilities, lack of proper guidelines, proper guidance given to them, proper implementation of various laws. Let us see what was the trigger which led to this particular crisis. Now, as such, there are some facts that we were able to identify. There are 40 million workers who have been affected by this particular pandemic. We have nearly 13 legislations which focus on safety, health, welfare. We have 40 odd regional heads in charge of overlooking the scenario of migrant workers, yet many were left stranded on the streets. Our observations and study during this, our observation and study about the migrant workers led to the understanding of instances of non-compliance can be one of the reasons where this particular issue crept up in such great enormity. Non-compliance in the part of the contractors. As per the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, the Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 explicitly define and discuss the various responsibilities of the contractors, principal employers, followed by the Chapter 4 and Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, which describe the role of inspectors. Now, the contractors are liable to pay their return fare, suppose their period of employment has expired. With the first lockdown concluded, the second lockdown also in progress, there is no hope in the near future of the organization opening their shops. So that indirectly meant it was kind of the end of their employment period. So that meant the contractors had to pay them return fare to return back home. Otherwise, also, the payment of wages had to be made because of the guideline given by the government. And in addition to that, there is a certain displacement allowance which had to be paid. Many workers, in many of our news reports, we have seen they have claimed that there was no payment of wages made at all. In case the contractor fails, in case the contractor does not live by or comply to these provisions, it becomes the responsibility of the principal employer to nominate a representative. He should be responsible for all the payments that are due in terms of displacement, payment of wages, or even the return fare. In addition, the principal employer is also responsible for providing facilities for this particular migrant worker who is stranded here without any job, without any future prospects. Now, here we have seen in most cases, principal employers were also not complying with these norms that are stated in the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. Needless to say, there were a lot of lapses in the way the government also reacted. The first and the foremost reaction should have been from the inspectors who are authorized to ensure such compliance is taken care of in such exigencies. It is their responsibility to be satisfied whether the provisions of the Act are being complied or not, which in most cases has not been taken care of. We saw there was displacement. We saw huge crowds thronging in the bus stands, railway stations. We saw the people who did not have adequate measures. We saw the people the migrant workers were made to walk long distances. There was no proper data that was created as a norm that had to be done as per the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, so as to provide the amount of facilities that could have been planned. We saw people stranded in roads. They were struggling through the scorching heat, and eventually they had to struggle through their ways, and maybe even to this day the scenarios have not changed much. Meanwhile, there were relief measures which were planned out by organizations, by associations, NGOs, by providing midday meal, providing meals to these migrant workers, ensuring they were given adequate essentials so that they can carry on with their livelihood, and also ensuring there is some respite given in terms of transporting them back to their hometowns. We saw celebrities playing their role, and we also saw organizations like AIF, American Indian Foundation, which tried to reskill and upskill self-employed workers to come up with some better opportunities while they were able to train self-employed workers to stitch masks, because that was the need of the hour, and earn a livelihood out of which. While these relief measures are being worked out, can we look at this scenario in a more broader perspective? We saw industries come to a standstill because of the lockdown, but we also understood the lockdown meant, the scenario described, your workers are at the bottom of your pyramid when you are looking at the structure of your organization. They are the ones who are running your organization. They are the ones who are contributing to a great extent in the organization. They are also ones who are supposed to have experienced benefit from the legal mechanism that had to be served to them, which in any case did not serve the purpose. The legal mechanism here can also be in a very basic sense. The company has to register itself when it is employing migrant workers. Many a time, such registrations lead to a lot of legal obligations for the organizations, which will eventually add burden to the organizations. Therefore, many a times we have seen the organizations do not really register in detail in the actual formats, which eventually leads to the legal mechanisms failing to serve the purpose of their existence. Now, the betterment, of course, can be when we are going to enforce and comply with these laws in a more structured manner. What is the way forward? There is there is an idea which is being mooted with with the proposal of occupational safety, health, and working conditions code. These are the labor legislations code, which has been proposed in the year 2019. This code aims to concise 44 different labor laws and present a set of standard codes which has to be followed by all the organizations, irrespective of state or central owned organizations. Now, there is a concern here because many a times there are activists who present the idea that the relevance or the seriousness of the various laws that it is going to incorporate might get diluted when you have a code like this. However, inclusion of serious aspects, inclusion of gaps, inclusion of areas which needs more attention in the legal system can be done now in the labor legislations code for 2019. Of course, creating awareness about these laws. Now we have 44 odd laws, but none of the migrant workers are really aware about it. They're not really aware of what are their rights, what is their role in ensuring they have a better livelihood, better lifestyle, and a better living in whichever place that they are living in. Like we have Consumer Protection Act, which continuously proposes advertisements and ensures there is awareness about consumer rights. Efforts can be taken in making the migrant workers also aware about their rights. Strict compliance by all stakeholders so that there is avoidance of such issues in the future. You're also securing future generations of migrant workers. Now, they are not just one set of people who come and go. They are people who could have families and generations to come up. And it is also the responsibility of the legal system, which can, if it can really look into the future generations of migrant workers, also as part of the efforts or mechanisms that you would want to take up in the future forthcoming days. Also looking at sensitization of local authorities about the rights and treatment of workers. Many a times we have seen local authorities standing unaware on what to be done and how do we take it forward. Now we have come to the juncture where we would be trying to bring in the attention of the gathering here towards more important aspects of the migrant legislations. I would be joined by my colleague, Professor Megha, and we would now want to look out for some important aspects, some food for thought. Now we did talk about legislations, we did talk about implementation, some lapses in their compliance, but is that all that we are looking at? Is it all that we should be doing? Should law just be written and not implemented? The scenario was such that we have enormous number of laws, enormous number of data or methodologies written, described as to how the law has to be taken forward, how should the law be presented, how should it be implemented. But is it just in books or should it be implemented?
The pandemic of this magnitude has made India's invisible poor visible to us. A lot of activists say that this probably is one of the worst hours after independence with respect to migrant workers. This turned out to be more of a migrant crisis rather than a pandemic crisis. Yeah, we never even, probably a lot of us didn't even know these figures that we have millions of people who migrate. Yeah, we knew that these are people from not our city, but did we know that there are so many people who have moved? Yeah, so these are people, and even if they move, what is their economic status? we need to understand that these are people who come down to urban cities, urban setups. They make sure we have the infrastructure. Yeah, they are the backbone of various such activities. They are using those. We are making our lives better. We are making our economic conditions better. What about their economic condition? How is that they can improve? Yeah, to a greater extent, as my colleague mentioned, a lockdown was something that all of us used to probably spend some quality time with our family or get back to certain hobbies of us. But what did these people have to do? Yeah, they were literally on roads. They were disordered. They really didn't know what to do. Yeah, the question mark that they had about their future is something that we really need to think of. Now, every time, do we have to just blame the government, or do we have to just blame that it was the employer's duty to pay, or it is the contractor's duty? Don't you think each one of us are responsible? Can't each one of us do something to this? Yeah, probably. I'm not saying we can, donate some amount to it. No, I don't think these people want money. They are not looking for some donations. They are looking for a livelihood. How many of them actually even paid their domestic help during this lockdown? Because we obviously domestic helps were not allowed to come into our say gated communities or our apartments. Yeah, so how many of us really paid our domestic help? How many of us have insisted that our domestic help should have their Aadhaar card registered with linked with their bank, with their phone numbers? How many of us have actually done that? Yeah, so when we only if we can take a step forward. Yeah, we can't blame only the authorities. We are equally responsible. We can do a small bit, even if it is probably a person. I think that will add a lot of value to it. Yeah, so it's very important that we don't play a blame game here. Yeah, each one of us should be actually trying to contribute something to it. In fact, to add on to this, an association called as the AIF, yeah, American Indian Foundation. Now, what this association has done in association with NDTV, in fact, they on Sunday last week they raised close to 16 crores for these people. Now, who are these people who have donated? All these are Indians who have migrated to US, but still they have their deep-rooted values in India. So they feel every time or any time that their country is in need, their people are in need, they always pitch in. So what these people are doing is they're not only doing donations. What they are doing is they have their volunteers in India. So what these volunteers are doing is they are trying to reach out to these migrants who probably do not have a source of income now because of this pandemic, and they're trying to upskill or reskill them. I'll quote an incident over here. In Hyderabad, a lady with 5 children, a widow with 5 children in her family, so which means there are 6 members in a family. She's an auto driver. Obviously, because of the lockdown, she obviously couldn't drive auto, or she did not have sufficient savings to make sure she can feed her children for so many days. Now, what this AIF, that is American Indian Foundation, what they did was they did not say we will give you money, we'll give you food, we'll give you free ration. No, they said we'll do one thing, we'll teach you stitching. Okay, so during this time of lockdown, you stitch masks for us. Yeah, you stitch masks for us, and we'll pay you for it. So, don't you think this is more of creating a livelihood? Yeah, that is what we are supposed to do. I don't think these people are expecting some donation or they're not expecting a sympathy. We need to empathize with them. We need to value them because repeatedly, I'm telling you, they are the backbone of our economy.
So the migrant workers need not necessarily be there just to do your random course. They're just be there to help you with your construction work or your manufacturing sectors. They should thrive and not just survive. They're just not about earning a livelihood. Legislations are focused on providing a livelihood, providing a welfare system, providing health and benefits. But it's up to it's up to us to really comply to those terms. It's up to us to be really aware of all these mechanisms and ensure they are also aware, and therefore they are able to benefit from all of these mechanisms. With this thought, we would like to also include that the migrant crisis may not be a crisis as such, it's more of a humanitarian crisis. It's about how humane we could have been, but we didn't. However, this is not the end. We still have a long future and another opportunity to really look into it from this perspective.
Thank you all. We would like to thank Professor
Ram K. Navratna for his valuable inputs and timely inputs timely inputs related to this particular webinar. Thank you thank you so much, sir, for your valuable inputs.
We are now open to questions.
Migrants will be dual-minded to migrate again to get survive post-COVID. What are going to be changes after lockdown if they don't return to their normal work, and what would be the measures to be taken to replace these changes? Should we go on that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if we can take all the questions today, but we will try answering, or we will try probably we'll try answering as many as possible. But in case if we are not able to do, you can always get back to us. Our mail IDs are also there. You can always get back to us. So first we'll go with this question by Gomati. Gomati says, migrants are of dual-minded to migrate again to get survive post-COVID. Due to this situation, what all will be the changes after lockdown if they don't return to their normal work, and what will be the measures to take in replacing these changes? As I already mentioned, Gomati, see, there are two parts to this. Firstly, these migrants will only return if they don't find a livelihood in their parent city. Okay, so in their villages, if they are not able to survive, if they don't have an income over there, only then they will think of again migrating. Because as I mentioned, these people are just not looking for some amount to be put into their accounts, or some some groceries or ration to be given. Yeah? So they are looking more into a livelihood. So if they are not able to receive that livelihood, if they are not able to make that, then for sure they are going to migrate. So which means employers who really are who are in deep trouble tentatively with labor shortage may not face the labor shortage then. But if they don't return, yes, then employers really are in trouble, because they might face this labor shortage. Yeah, or if they even have labors to work on, that can turn out to be expensive as well. Or we can also look at it in this way: they might these labors will probably end up getting more exploited, because they feel they would probably receive an answer like, there was a lockdown, there was no business, so you will be paid only this much of amount. So they get 40% or 50% of their wages, and they end up working for more number of hours. Yeah, so there are different things that could happen. It's very difficult to probably say this is the measure that can be done. So the only way what we can look at is trying to create a awareness among people and trying to empathize with them. Yeah.
In addition to these aspects, in addition to what ma'am has suggested, ensuring when they return, what can be the new normal? Right. So when we look at the scenarios, then you may have to ensure there is more facility provided in terms of having them more secure, more safe from any kind of virus or a scenario as such. It could also mean you are looking at having a situation or a facility where they are screened and they are protected from any other such issues. We go on to the next question.
Pavan Kumar has a question. He's saying, Pavan, when we say migrant workers, we are specifically talking only about blue-collared workers. So, as I said, even when I'm a migrant, I have moved to a city with qualification for a job. So we don't come into the category of migrant workers. Yeah, but yes, we are migrants. We are migrants. But when we say migrant workers, they are the blue-collared workers, who generally are daily wage workers.
Migrant workers, as in the legislation, also carries references towards anybody who's appointed in any form of organizational work or activity. And in this particular case, you're looking at only those people who migrate from one or state or one city to the other, and more so for the blue collar workers. We also have a question from Madam Stella Joyce, who has asked, how can big corporates do their part in assisting the migrant situations? I think big corporates can do a lot. First thing, you can identify or nominate a representative who's going to ensure there is compliance, done or executed at every level. In terms of first level is your registration in the registrar of companies or in the labor commissioner, saying that yes, I am an employee, the 50 or 100 or 25 or whatever number, even if any number above 5, that you are employing this many number of employees in your organization, and therefore you are also obliging to cater to the other facilities or other benefits also. The other benefits would include ensuring there are proper working hours. Many a times we have seen in the manufacturing sectors, production units, or in some cases the MSMEs or smaller organizations, since the number is less, since the sheer number of employees working in such an organization is small, there are cases where they tend to overwork. Standardizing such measures or standardizing such conditions becomes a very important step that the corporates can really take it up in a big way. We'll move on to other questions. Yes. Thank you so much, participants. We would like to thank the MDP and Training Department of Ramaiah Institute of Management. There are a few more questions which we see on the chats. We will definitely get back to all of them post the session. And we will see how well we can really get back with effective answers to all your queries. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much.